Are there stuff like love and consciousness and all those kinds of topics? Do they come up in psych in the knowledge base?
Oh, of course. So an important part of human knowledge, in fact, it's difficult to understand human behavior and human history without understanding human emotions and why people do things and how emotions drive people to do things, and all of that is extremely important in getting psych to understand things. For example, in coming up with scenarios. So one of the applications that psych does, one kind of application it does, is to generate plausible scenarios of what might happen and what might happen based on that and what might happen based on that and so on. So you generate this ever-expanding sphere, if you will, of possible future things to worry about or think about. And in some cases, those are intelligence agencies doing possible terrorist scenarios so that we can defend against terrorist threats before we see the first one. Sometimes they are computer security attacks so that we can actually close loopholes and vulnerabilities before the very first time someone actually exploits those, and so on. Sometimes they are scenarios involving more positive things, involving our plans, like, for instance, what college should we go to, what career should we go into, and so on. What professional training should I take on, that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of there are all sorts of useful scenarios that can be generated that way, of cause and effect that go out. And many of the linkages in those scenarios, many of the steps, involve understanding and reasoning about human motivations, human needs, human emotions, what people are likely to react to in something that you do, and why and how and so on. So that was always a very important part of the knowledge that we had to represent in the system.
So I talk a lot about love. So I got to ask, do you remember off the top of your head how psych is able to represent various aspects of love that are useful for understanding human nature and therefore integrating into this whole knowledge base of common sense? What is love?
We try to tease apart concepts that have enormous complexities to them and variety to them, down to the level where you don't, as it were, you don't need to tease them apart further.
So love is too general of a term. It's not useful.
Exactly. So when you get down to romantic love and sexual attraction, you get down to parental love, you get down to filial love, and you get down to love of doing some kind of activity or creating. So eventually you get down to maybe 50 or 60 concepts, each of which is a kind of love. They're interrelated, and then each one of them has idiosyncratic things about it. And you don't have to deal with love to get to that level of complexity. Even something like in, X being in Y, meaning physically in Y. We may have one English word in to represent that, but it's useful to tease that apart, because the way that the liquid is in the coffee cup is different from the way that the air is in the room, which is different from the way that I'm in my jacket, and so on. And so there are questions like, if I look at this coffee cup, well, I see the liquid. If I turn it upside down, will the liquid come out? And so on. If I have, say, coffee with sugar in it, if I do the same thing, the sugar doesn't come out, right? It stays in the liquid because it's dissolved in the liquid, and so on. So by now we have about 75 different kinds of in the system, and it's important to distinguish those. So if you're reading along an English text and you see the word in, the writer of that was able to use this one innocuous word because he or she was able to assume that the reader had enough common sense and world knowledge to disambiguate which of these 75 kinds of in
That's
they actually
fascinating.
meant. And the same thing with love. You may see the word love, but if I say, I love ice cream, that's obviously different than if I say I love this person or I love to go fishing or something like that. So you have to be careful not to take language too seriously, because people have done a kind of parsimony, a kind of terseness, where you have as few words as you can, because otherwise you'd need 500,000 words in your language, which is a lot of words. That's like 10 times more than most languages really make use of, and so on. Just like we have on the order of about 1 million concepts in psych, because we've had to tease apart all these things. And so when you look at the name of a psych term, most of the psych terms actually have 3 or 4 English words in a phrase which captures the meaning of this term, because you have to distinguish all these types of love, you have to distinguish all these types of in, and there's not a single English word which captures most of these things.
Yeah, and it seems like language, when used for communication between humans, almost as a feature, has some ambiguity built in. It's not an accident, because like the human condition is a giant mess, and so it feels like nobody wants two robots, like very precise formal logic conversation on a first date, right? Like there's some dance of like uncertainty, of wit, of humor, of push and pull, and all that kind of stuff. If everything is made precise, then life is not worth living, I think, for in terms of the human experience.
And we've all had this experience of creatively misunderstanding